Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. Today's daf is Daf Chav in Yevmot. We learned for Shlomo ben Rachel, Yosef ben Chanichal, and Elazar ben Reuma. We were at the eighth line, on the beginning of the eighth line on Daf Chav Zayin. Gufa Amar Shmuel, and we know the Mishnah that we've learned already several times referred to. This Mishnah was dealing with, and this is a constant discussion that we're going to have here. Four brothers, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Two of them were married to two sisters. Reuven and Shimon were married to Leah and Rachel. The two brothers died. Now, it's not clear, we didn't say who died first, but they both died and left two sisters to Levi and Yehuda. But Levi and Yehuda, each of the sisters, they really can't marry because it's achot sekukato. Just like you can't marry your wife's sister. Well, in this case, they're not the wife's sister. There's two almanas here, and there's two brothers, Yehuda and Levi and Yehuda, who have other wives, Saros, right? Other regular wives, common wives, whatever. And these two ladies, Leah and Rachel, fell to them. Now, neither one's married, but each one, if Levi and Yehuda look at each one, Leah or Rachel, it's achot sekukato, right? Because each one is zakuk to him. So that's the issue over here. So Gufa Amar Shmuel from the eighth line on Chav Zayin. Amar Shmuel says Cholotz la'achayos. The Mishnah said, what do you do in that case? You can't make yibum on either one. It's chosek, but you got to give chalitza. Why? Because as we'll see, zika, this kukato is drabanan. It's not a chot ishto, right? We had before. If one of the women who fell to you to yibum is your wife's sister, and you're married to your wife, it's potter. That's an erva. That's one of the 15. Achot ishto. This is not achot ishto. This is achot kukato. So Shmuel said cholotz la'achayos. So what do? You give them chalitza. Okay, but if you give chalitza to the sisters, right, to Rachel and Leah. Now, remember, do you have to give to Rachel and Leah chalitza? Yes, they came from two different husbands, Reuven and Shimon. It wasn't like Reuven died and left 2 wives, 3 wives, 10 wives, and you only give chalitza to one of them. It came from 2 different wives. So Shmuel says, let's say you gave chalitza to the sisters, Rachel and Leah, lo niftu tsaros. The tsaros, each one had a tsara, Rachel's tsara, Leah's tsara, the co-wife, right? The co-wife. So, meaning, Reuven died, left Leah with a tzara, and Shimon died, left Rachel with a tzara. The tzaras are not patur from their chalitza, even though normally, if a man dies and leaves several wives, 2 or more wives, you give chalitza to one. Over here, not. Why? Because since he really can't marry any of them, listen to this carefully, since he can't marry either of the sisters, because each one is a chotz kukato, Levi or Yehuda. Let's look at it from Levi's point of view. Levi can't marry either Leah or Rachel, because each one is a chotz kukato. So therefore, since he can't marry, the chalitza that he gives them is a weaker chalitza. He can't marry them anyway. Normally, yibum goes to the chalitza. If you make yibum, you make chalitza. If you can make chalitza, you can make yibum. But over here, you can't make yibum, at least rabbanan, a chotz kukato. Therefore, the chalitza is a weak chalitza, and besides giving chalitza to Leah and to Rachel, right, to Leah and to Rachel, he also has to give chalitza to the tzara. That's what Shmuel says. Cholotz la'achayos. If he gave chalitza to the sisters, lo niftu tzaros, he has to give the chalitza to them too. He has a wife on his own. He has a wife on his own. It makes no difference if Levi's married or not. But he has to give chalitza to Leah, and if he gave chalitza to Leah, he also has to give chalitza to Leah's tzara, even though they're co-wives, because the chalitza is a weak chalitza. So Shmuel says, Mishnah says you have to give chalitza to the sisters, right? 2 brothers died, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. 2 of the Reuven and Shimon are married to Leah and Rachel. Reuven and Shimon died. Levi and Yehuda have to give chalitza to, or each Levi or Yehuda have to give chalitza to the sisters, right? To Rachel and Leah. They can't marry them, but since they can't marry them, their chalitza is a weak chalitza, and they have to give chalitza to the tzara of each one as well. Lo niftu tzaros. Right. So he said, again, a gufa, Amar Shmuel, cholotz la'achayos lo niftu tzaros, l'tzaros niftu chaychayos. But let's say give chalitza to the tzara. Remember, you only have to give chalitza normally to one co-wife, right? To one of the wives. Guys got wives that 10 wives, you give to one of them. But a chalitza to the tzara here is stronger. That the Gemara is going to say, we're going to try to figure out why is that. Because it's not a chotz kukato, which is also. So it's not as strong. Therefore the chalitza is a stronger chalitza. In other words, he can't marry the tzara either, as we'll see, but it's a weaker zika there. The zika is a weaker zika, and therefore it's not so strong. It's not as strong to the chotzkuka. So each sister, Rachel and Leah, are chotzkuka. It's not a chotzishta. He's not married. Levi's not married to Rachel or Leah, but it's a chotzkuka. So it's a sister of the one who is bonded to you, almost married, partially married. Let's call it. So, but the tzara is a weaker connection, and therefore the tzara is a stronger chalitza. And if you give chalitza to the tzara, the sisters are parted. Now you have to give chalitza to both Reuven and Shimon's wives because they're coming from two different houses. It's not they coming from it's not like one guy left 4 wives. There are 2 brothers, each of them died and left a wife who have a tzara, who happen to be a sister of the other ones. So tzara niftu tzaras. That's what he says. Now that's where two wives fell from 2 different brothers, and each one had a co-wife. Yeah.
Reuven and Shimon both have 2 wives.
That's right.
One is a sister of
that's
the
right.
other.
Right.
So who says which one is the Yavama and which one is the Tzara? Let the one that's not a sister be the one that he does Yavama to.
Not Yavama, Chalitza. So the Gemara is going to ask you. According to Beis Shammai, you could. According to Beis Shammai, you could. But we learned before that no. We know which one's which.
Which one determines this one and this one are the
no. Reuben,
this one and this one are the Tzara.
No. Levi and Yehuda are 2 brothers. Each one of them could do chalitza or yibam in theory, right? But the rabbi said that it's a chotz kukato is also just like a chotz ishto. Therefore, you can't do yibam on the chotz kukato. And the tzara is the tzara of her too. The tzara is the tzara like the tzara of an erva. The Chachama made it like a chotz ishto, like an erva drabanan. It's an erva drabanan. It's like a chotz ishto, and therefore the tzara is tzara's erva drabanan. That's why you can't make yibam on the tzara. That's right. Now that's one case. We're going to come back to this case. This gufa means we're going to look at it, right? We mentioned it before at the top of the page, bottom of yesterday's daf, and the top of the page, and we're going to analyze it more. But before we get to that, the Gemara finishes this brayso also. What else did Shmuel say? Okay, if you gave, let's say you gave a get. What do you mean as a get? What's a get doing over here? You don't give a get, you give chalitza, right? But if you gave a get, the rabbi said it's like you pushed her away, and kivin shalabana, you shouldn't marry her again. You can't make yibam afterwards. Let's say he gave a get to one of the 2, to Leah, and then he gave her chalitza. Lo nifter tzara. This is in a case where it's not even two brothers dying. One brother died and left 2 wives. How could he, right? Doesn't meaning if you walk over to a woman in the street and you give her a get, it's meaningless. You're not married to her. She wouldn't be prohibited from marrying a Kohen subsequently. But over here, where there is a bond, right? There is a bond because there is some sort of a zika. Even if we say ain zika, it's not like you're really married. The Torah said she can't marry this. Reuven died, 1 wife. Reuven and Leah are married. He dies with no children. She can't just marry somebody in the street. Now she's bonded to Shimon or to Shimon and his brothers. So because of that, how does the Torah say you get rid of that bond? Either marry her, and then make it a permanent bond, or give her chalitza. But the rabbi said if you give her a get, you also can't subsequently marry. You still have to give her chalitza, right? You still have to give her chalitza. The get doesn't take care of the problem, but it makes it you can't marry her anymore. And therefore, if you give her if you give her a get, let's say a guy dies. Now you still have to give her chalitza, but let's say there's 2 wives, no 2 brothers, just 1 brother died. Reuven died over here, and he left 2 wives. Sarah and Bela. Okay, Sarah and Bela, and he gave a get to Sarah. Can he now make yibam on Bela? No, because once he pushed it away, he can't. So he says cholotz labalas a get. Let's say he gave her a get, and he's to Sarah, which is l'chor, it's meaningless, right? Min Torah, it doesn't mean anything. But you pushed her away, you can't marry them anymore. Now you gave her chalitza. You followed it up. The rabbi said, what are you giving her a get for? You got to give her chalitza. You gave her chalitza. Lo nifter tzara. Bela still needs a chalitza too. Because the chalitza you gave is a weak chalitza. Because why is it weak? It's deficient because you've already given her a get. You've already pushed her away a little bit. So that's another thing that Shmuel said. Chalitza ba'as get lo nifter tzara. With tzara, if you gave a chalitza though, you still need chalitza, right? You gave your brother died, left 2 wives. You gave a get to one of them. You still need to give chalitza. If you give chalitza to the other one, that's fine. That gets rid of the problem because normally you only have to give chalitza to one of the wives. You don't have to give two. But then it's right. So here says chalitza about if you give chalitza to the weaker one, the one who already got a get, lo nifter tzara, you still have to give a chalitza to a Bela. Litzara, if you gave chalitza to Bela who hadn't gotten anything yet, then nifter balas again. Chalitz lebalas a mimer, another step. Mimer is a kedushin drabana. We said, remember yibam menatori, you just take her and consummate the marriage and that's it. But the rabbi said give her a kedushin first. That's called mimer. Let's say you gave mimer to one of them. Now, if you give mimer to one of them, the halacha is if you decide subsequently to get rid of her, what do you have to do? You have to give her a get and chalitza. A get for the mimer, kedushin rabbanan, a get rabbanan for a kedushin rabbanan, and the chalitza to get rid of the zika min haTorah. So chalitz lebalas mimer lo nifter tzara. Let's say you gave chalitza to the balas mimer. So the tzara is not potter from that. Why? Because again, you've weakened the effect. You've given her mimer now, so you've made it a little bit, you've strengthened the connection, but the chalitza is weak now because it's got to work against the mimer, which it doesn't really, and against the regular zika. So chalitza balas mimer, lo nifter tzara, you have to give the tzara a proper mimer. The tzara nifter balas mimer. That's what Shmuel says. Okay, the last two cases we'll deal with later on in the Masechet, but we're concerned with the first case. The first case where he says, again, going back to our case, not where one guy died, left two wives, where two guys died. Reuben and Shimon both died, and they left two sisters who they were married to, and each sister had a tzara. So the Gemara now asks this question. Maishna, now we're going to analyze it. Maishna l'chayis to lo nifter tzara. Why, if you give chalitza to one of the sisters, or both sisters, right? We said the tzaras aren't potter. Why? Because the chalitza is a weaker chalitza because you couldn't marry them, right? It's a chotz kukaso. And you ask, what about tzaras? So the tzaras is a tzaras. The Gemara is asked now. Maishna lachayus to lo nifter tzaros. What's the difference? Why do you say if you give chalitza to the sisters, the tzaras are not potter, meaning yes, they'll give them an extra chalitza, another chalitza. It's a chotz kukaso, right? It's a chotz isha. Each one is a chotz isha. Each one of these wives, Leah and Rachel, to you, Levi, what is she to you? She's a chotz kukaso. She's the sister of the other one who's zakuk to you, because both sisters are zakuk to you. So why is that different? Chalitz the tzaras also nami. If you give chalitz to the tzaras also, it's weak nami. The sisters also shouldn't be potter. In other words, what is a tzara? A tzara is a co-wife. According to Beis Shammai, you can marry a co-wife, but according to Beis Hillel, we go like Beis Hillel, you can't marry the co-wife either. Tzaras erva. Remember, that's the first mission in the Masechet. If your brother died and you're married to his wife's sister already, so you can't make even her. And if there was any other co-wives, they're also potter. So this is also tzaras achos isha bezika, tzaras achos kukaso. So what's the difference? Why is one better than the other? Neither time. If you give chalitza to one, it shouldn't be good for the co-wives, and if you give chalitza to the co-wife, it shouldn't be good for the sister either. Savar Shmuel ain't Zika. So the Gemara says, you know what? He owes Zika. Zika's not so strong. Zika's not. What is Zika? Ain't Zika? We have back in Yud Zayin. Rashi explained it. It's not like they're really married, so it's not such a strong connection. So what? So the first question is, V'amar Shmuel Yesh Zika. We had before back in Yeches that Shmuel's Rav said ain't Zika. Rav Yehuda says Zika, and Shmuel for sure said Zika. That's what he came out in Yeches and Beis over there. Shmuel says there is Zika, and if there is Zika, each one has chotz kukaso, and the tzaras are tzaras chotz kukaso. As the Divrei Omer ain't Zika. He himself holds yesh Zika. Again, that the bond that exists. The rabbi said that the bond that exists, when we say Zika, we're talking about Minatorah, there is definitely a bond there, right? Because the brother has to marry her, is a chiv to marry her, call it what you want. But the rabbis called it a Zika. Do you hold Yesh Zika Midarabanan? And therefore it's like they're engaged already, like they're a Rusa or not. So Shmuel really holds Yesh Zika, but he's speaking over L'divrei Omer Ein Zika. The one who holds Ein Zika, this is what he would say. L'divrei Omer Ein Zika. The one who holds Ein Zika, so the bond isn't so strong, and therefore the tzara, if you gave chalitza to the tzara, that's a good chalitza, and that works for the sisters too. If that's the case, if the bond isn't so strong, in other words, achotz kukalka is not it's not a chos ishto, right? Not really married. So if you give chalitza to the sisters, and you have to give chalitza to both sisters because they came from two different brothers. So why aren't the tzaras potter? The tzara, you only have to give chalitza to one of several co-wives. And if Zika isn't so strong to make it like a chotz kukaso so strong, Bishlama, I'll tell you why. Bishlama tzara de Rachel. Listen carefully. There's Leah and Rachel, right? Leah fell from Reuben, and Rachel fell from Shimon. Reuben died, then Shimon died. Okay. So if he gave chalitza, let's assume he gave chalitza first to Leah. Reuben died first. The older brother died first, and he gave chalitza to Leah. So I can understand why. Listen carefully. Amar says, "Bishlam etzara de Rachel lo tipater." If you gave chalitza to the Leah first and then to Rachel, I understand why that's weak. Lo tipater. The tzara should not be pater from there because the chalitza of Rachel is weak. Why? Because he couldn't marry Rachel anyway because it's a chalutzaso. Listen, right? Because he gave chalitza first to Leah. Bishlam etzara de Rachel lo tipater. I understand why that if you gave the tzara of Rachel should not be pater via the chalitza that you gave to Rachel, which was the second chalitza because he gave chalitza first to Leah. So the keeping the chalitza Leah, once he gave chalitza to Leah, v'hadar chalitza Leah, and then he gave chalitza to Rachel subsequently. How about the chalitza to Rachel chalitza psula? Rachel's chalitza is a deficient chalitza. Why? Because he couldn't marry Rachel anyway because it's a chos chalutzaso, which is also like a chos ishto, right? Like a chos ishto, a chos chalutzaso. You can't marry a chos. Pardon? You have to give her chalitza. You give her another chalitza. No, what happens to Rachel? It's a weak chalitza, but she's okay now. Once you give her chalitza, she's free to marry. She's free to marry somebody else. But it's a weak chalitza, so I can understand why the weak chalitza that you gave to Rachel does not suffice for Rachel's co-wife. That I can understand. Another chalitza, exactly. He'll wind up giving three chalitzas. A chalitza to Leah, which is good for Leah and her co-wife. Then on to Rachel, which is a weak one because he can't marry Rachel anyway. And then another one to give a chalitza. You're all in court. Maybe they can schedule them all in the same court session. Take care of it. Discount, right? How about the chalitza, Rachel, chalitza? So I understand that. Elatzara de Leah tipater. Why do you say? Listen carefully. You say if you give chalitza to the sisters, it doesn't work for the co-wife. Why not? If you give chalitza, we said over here, give chalitza first to Leah, and then we said, and then what? To Rachel, and it doesn't suffice for Rachel's, but the one for Leah should suffice for Leah's co-wife. That's what he says. But he didn't say that. He said, Amar Shmuel chalutz l'chayis lo niftu tzaros. It doesn't help for the tzara. Why not? Elatzar de Leah tipater. So that's the interesting. Leah's tzara should be pater. Why is a chalitza for Leah not good for it's a weak zika anyway, so why shouldn't it help? You have to give one chalitza and that's it. Milo nifter tzar stignami de kamar atzar de Rachel. He says when a lo nifter stikaka means Rachel's only. Why? Because Rachel's a weak one because she's already a chos chalutzaso because he gave chalitza first to Leah. But tzaros coming. You said tzaros sounds like both of them. If you give chalitza to the sisters, doesn't work for the tzaros at all. No, tzaros to Alma just means tzaros. It means the second tzara, the Leah's, Rachel's tzara Rachel in all cases. Tzaros to Alma. Yachi cholz the tzaros nifter achayos. If that's the case, you say if you gave the other way around. If you gave chalitza to the tzaros, you gave chalitza to the tzara of Leah and to the tzara of Rachel. Then it helps for Leah and Rachel. But tzaros to Rachel mi miftra. If you give chalitza to the tzara of Rachel after you gave to the tzara of Leah, would Rachel would that suffice for Rachel too? But Tanan we learn, just like you can't marry a chos chalitzasa, but Tanan we learn, Asar Adam, listen carefully, Bitsaras Krobas chalitzasa. We'll see why later on. You can't marry the tzara of the relative of your chalutza. Okay, now who would that be in this case? If you gave, right, you can't marry the tzara of the relative of your chalutza. So over here, if you gave chalitza, right, if you gave chalitza to Leah, and who's Leah's karova? That's Rachel, and her tzara is the tzara of Rachel. So you can't marry her anyway. You can't marry tzaras karovas chalutzaso. So if that's the case, how could you say that if you? So it's a weak connection. It's a weak connection. You can't marry her anyway. So how could her chalitza be good enough for Rachel? Here's the question: Rachel mi miftera. Again, Rashi says Atzar de Rachel mi miftera achalitza the tzara mi miftera Rachel. But you couldn't marry the tzara anyway. The answer is Shmuel nami his v'lo his. You're right. Shmuel doesn't mean in general It doesn't mean in all cases that if you gave chalitza to the sisters, it doesn't help for the tzara, and if you gave chalitza to the tzara, it does help for the sisters. No, it doesn't mean that. Hischel means this: if you started with the sisters, meaning you started with Leah, you started with the hischel b'chayos lo yigmer b'tzaras. If you started with Leah, you gave Leah first chalitza. You shouldn't then, the next chalitza you shouldn't give to Rachel. You shouldn't give to Rachel's tzara, but rather give it to Rachel. That's what it means. Hischel b'chayos lo yigmer b'tzaras titnan. Right, like we just said, Asr Adam B'Tzaras Kravas Chalitzaso. If you started off with Leah, if you started giving chalitza to Leah, okay, you give chalitza to Leah, and what is the tzara of Rachel to Leah? She's Tzaras Krovas Chalitzaso. Tzara, she's the tzara of the relative of Leah. You can't marry her anyway, so don't give chalitza now to the tzara of Rachel. If you started with Leah, don't give the second one to Tzaras Krovas Chalitzaso, because that won't help for Rachel. Rather, give it to Rachel. Hischil b'tzaras, but if you started with let's say you started off with Leah's tzara, you gave it to her first, then yigmar af b'chayos, then you could even finish with Rachel. In other words, you gave first to the tzara of Leah, which sufficed for Leah also. You could then you could even do the sister of. You can even give the second chalitza. You can give even to Rachel. You're allowed to marry the relative of the tzara of your chalutza. So if you gave chalitza to Leah's co-wife, she's the chalutza. Her tzara would be Leah, and the krova of the tzara would be Rachel. Then you could give it to her, and therefore that would suffice for the tzara. So in other words, if you started off with Leah's tzara and you gave chalitza to her, that helps for Leah. And then you can give the second chalitza to Rachel herself, because that will help for her Leah. So we come out according to this, that ain't Zika, at this point we're saying, and there is no difference with Leah and a tzara, that if chalitza is good for one, it's good for the other. However, you have to look at the situation, and you have to say, because of these rules of Asr Adam B'Tzaras Kravas Chalitzaso, that if you started off with Leah, it would be good for her co-wife, right? It would be good for the co-wife. It would be good for tzara too. But then you shouldn't give the second one to Rachel's co-wife, because that won't suffice for Rachel. But if you started off with Leah's co-wife, no, if you started off with Leah, then do the second one also to Rachel. That's okay. If you start off with Leah, then you give the second one to Leah, and each one will be for the co-wife. But if you started off with Leah, don't do the second one to Rachel's co-wife, because that won't suffice for Rachel. That's all one way to learn. Rav Ashi says, no, Lam Kedakamer. Like we said originally. What do you mean like I said originally? Kedamar Shmuel Bereisha, Rashi says, forget about it. We say, these are weak answers when we say Shmuel holds of Zika, but he also, according to the one who holds Ein Zika, this is what you'd have to say. The one who holds Ein Zika, you have to each one, and it works for Ein Zika, so it should work for for your tzara in general, but why doesn't it work for the co-wife in both cases? So you say Ein Zika, to the sisters, it's a stronger one, this one's a weaker one, a little bit hard. Rav Ashi says, like we said originally, very simple. But this is really what Avram was pointing out before. Why should why can't you marry the tzara? You can marry the sister. There's no real Isser Min HaTorah on Achotz Kukaso. It's Achotz Ishto, right? If she's your wife's sister, then you can't marry her. Achotz Kukaso is Rabbanan. So the rabbi said Achotz Kukaso is also like Achotz Ishto, but they didn't take it that far to the tzara. They took it only as far as the sister herself. The sister herself, if she is destined to you, she's bonded to you, it's like Achotz Ishto, you can't marry your sister. But they didn't take it as far as the tzara. That's what he means over here. It says Rashi near the bottom, but if you give sister, if you say Yezika, so Yezika means that each sister is like married to you, and therefore the chalitza of each one is weak. And I feel it tzaras leia lo miftra, I feel it says lo miftra, lo miftra chalatz tzaras, but chalitza chayos grua, I feel tzaras leia, meaning that even the tzara is not, because you can't marry, like we said originally, because you can't marry either Rachel or Leah, a chalitza on either one does not help for the co-wives. Why? Because Zika is strong, and each sister is like she's your wife. So therefore, you can't marry either one of them because each one is like your wife. You can't marry each one is a chotz kukos like a chotz ishto, and therefore the chalitz, since you can't marry each one, the chalitz is also weak, and it doesn't help for the co-wife, right? Vafilu tzaras lay also a mifter. Cholz tzaras nifter achas, but if you give chalitza to the tzaras, then it's a stronger chalitza because you could marry them in theory, right? The chalitza is mishabachas mishalachos. You said it's still a chot. Why you can't marry the tzara either? It's just like you can't marry the sisters because it's achotz kukaso. The tzaras are tzaras achotz kukaso. It still is not strong. It's like a chotz kuka lohi. Mishum de lo alima zika l'shvil tzara. The zika that they say yesh zika, that each one is like married to you, is not strong enough to make the tzara like an erev. Lo gazer chacham ela b'chotz kukaso. The chacham only said achotz kukaso is like a chotz ishto, right? Two women fell to you, Levi, right? Levi's the brother. And the two women fell to him. Each one is like sort of like his wife, like his partial wife. So it's a choskuka, so he can't marry either one. And therefore the chalitza he has to give chalitza to both, but the chalitza on each one does not help for the tsaras because it's a weak chalitza because he can't marry them anyway. But why don't you say the tsaras also he can't marry? You're right, he can't marry the tsaras, but it's a weaker connection. And the rabbis didn't make it as strong as like an Arab. To the tsaras also. He has to give chalitza then to all four, correct. You have to chalitza to all four, either him or Yehuda's brother or other brothers. You have to give to all four.
It's all Drabanan anyway.
Pardon?
It's all Drabanan anyway.
Yeah.
What's this whole issue with it's weak, it's strong?
That's how the rabbi said it. That's exactly how the rabbi said it. Rashi, 2 lines from the bottom of the page says, so that's as far as they went. Now you say we need 4 if you started with the sisters. If you did it to the co-wives, then it's good enough. You only need 2 then. If you gave chalitza to the co-wives, to the co-wife of Leah and the co-wife of Rachel, that's good enough. That works for the sisters too. Understand? So you only need 2 in that case. That's what Rav Ashi says. So Tan Kavas Rav Ashi, a Bryce like Rav Ashi, Choletz l'chayis lo nifter tzaros. Here we have a Bryce which says, if you gave chalitza to the sisters, lo nifter tzaros, that's exactly the words of Shmuel. Choletz tzaros, but if you gave chalitza to tzaros, nifter achayos. You could do it that way. You can give chalitza to the co-wives. My time, alab mishum d'ksavar yesh zika. It must be because there is a zika, meaning the connection, the bond between the Yavam, Levi, and the two girls, Leah and Rachel, is strong like they're married, and therefore it's a weak zika. Below alima zika, the zika l'shir tzara kerva. However, yesh zika, but the zika is not strong enough to make the tzara as bad as an erva. That's what Bryce is mashma like Rav Ashi. Mar says no, it's no proof. Maybe the Bryce goes like Beishamai. Amar Bar Mamel, Hamani Beishamai goes Beishamai. It's not. Beishamai says, you remember the whole business of tzaras he throws out. He says, when is it a tzara? Only if 2 sisters fell together to one guy, then it's also. But normally he doesn't hold to the first mission. He holds that if Reuven and Shimon are married to 2 sisters, and Reuven dies with no children and left Leah to Shimon, he can't marry Leah, right? Because it's his wife's sister. But he could marry Leah's co-wife, contrary to what we've been learning, contrary to Beis Hillel. So he says, that Bryce goes like Beishamai, who says Beishamai is matir and tzaras lachem. They're really mutter. You know why? If you give chalitza to the sisters, it doesn't help for the tzaras. The tzaras you can get married anyway. You can marry them. So why don't you make even to them? Why do you say that if you give chalitza to the sisters, you still have to give 2 more? Right? You have to give 4, total of 4. You have to give 2 more to the co-wives. You can marry them. No. Rabbi Yochanan Nuri, the Amar Bolben, if it's Beishamai says you can literally marry the tzaras. You have to give chalitza to the co-wives, let's assume, right? I mean to the sisters. You have to give chalitza to the sisters. You can marry you wouldn't really have to give yibam, but you wouldn't have to give chalitza at all because if it's a co-wife, you could just do yibam on one. If you do yibam on one, you don't have to do chalitza on the other ones. So Beishamai matir tzaras lachem, and Yibum, why don't you make yibam? Remember, Yochanan already said after Machlokes Beishamai Hillel. What do you mean? According to, if you follow Beishamai's reasoning, they're going to be mamzerim according to Beis Hillel. You remember, because according to Beis Hillel, you can't marry the tzaras, and the kids would be a mamzer. So what did Rabbi Yochanan says? Let's say the old tzaras give him chalitza, get out of the problem. Just give him chalitza, yotza l'choladeus, and don't make even. They won't have any mamzerim. They weren't able, Rabbi Meir wasn't able to enact that because it was min hashamayim, as if to say that we hold like Beis Hillel, and we don't want to say, okay, let's consider Beis Shammai's opinion and therefore do chalitza to get rid of the problem. According to Beis Hillel, you don't need chalitza at all, right? If Reuven dies with no children and he left his wife Leah to Shimon, and she is the sister of Rachel, not only don't you do yibum, it's part of me, you don't chalitza, and you're on the tsaros either. According to Beis Shammai, you'd have to do chalitza on or marry the tzara. But Rabbi Yochanan says, just give them a chalitza and get rid of the problem that they weren't able to enact it. Later on, after Rabbi Yochanan wasn't able to be metaken, but later on they were metaken that to get around the problem. Remember, we learned that Beis Shammai did follow their own rules, and that could be a problem, and you have to keep records, etc., who's married to whom, etc. But later on, they were metaken that don't follow Beis Shammai. Even Beis Shammai don't follow their rules, go with them. But the point is that from this Bryce, it's no proof. So we have two ways to learn shot in Shmuel. Here's a question. Balas Getter Balas Maimer, again, where one person died, not two brothers, one person died, and he left two wives, right? Balas Getter Balas Maimer, Ezmen Kedemus. Here's a question, right? He's got two wives. This is not an issue of two sisters. We're going to come back to two sisters. This is just a guy left two wives. And what did he do? And he gave one a get. Okay, that means he can't marry her subsequently. He gave one a get, even though he wasn't married to her. And he gave another one mimer. You're a little confused over here, right? He gave one mimer, he gave one a get. Now, what do you have to do? He has to give chalitza to one of them. Right? He has to give chalitza to one. He doesn't have to give to both unless it's very weak. Right. So he says, Balas get a Balas Maimer, Ezmen Kedemus, who should he give who should he give the chalitza to? Balas get a difa, he said he also get Mishum, the Aschelba. He started with her, but what Begerishin? He started to get rid of her. And Rashi says, Achav Shemeis V'lo Beis Nashim V'asa Zem Maimer Lezu, Beget Lezu. You can't marry him or come below Yivna. But Kivin Sheiskal Garish, Ezman Haguna Lachlotz Fluta. Which one should he give chalitza to? Remember, a guy has two wives, you only have to give Yibam or chalitza to one. So here he didn't make Yibam at all. He gave Maimer to one and a get to the other. He has to follow it up with chalitza. Who does he give chalitza to? Which one is the stronger one to give to be yotze the other one? Okay, so that's your opinion. Let's see. So Balas again a difa. He started getting rid of her, so finish up with her chalitza. It's stronger to a marriage. He's stronger, getting into the marriage with her and give maimer and give chalitza to her. Amar Ravashi Tashma Umotor Galil. We're going to have later on in the fifth paragraph one of the hardest program in this Masechet. And Galil says, "Ein get, ein acher get." What does that mean? What does it mean? If a guy has two wives, Reuben died, left two wives to Shimon, two wives, not sisters, just his two wives, and he gave a get to one, so he has to follow it up with chalitza, right? He can't perform even, right? Then he gives a get to the other one. What does it get? What is that second one? Does the second one prohibit her, let's say, from a Kohen? And does the second one prohibit for Kohen? And does it also mean you can't marry her relatives anymore? Because if you give a get to a woman, right, she's still considered like your wife, like a chos ishto, right? And you can't marry her relatives either. So Malil says over there, ain't get acher get. If you give a get to one, right, the second one that you give a get to the second one is meaningless. Rashi says over here, ain't get shevam salam echad, echad v'nasim get lezu, ain't also b'kov shnia, di kama hani papa because there's no more zika. Right, if it doesn't help the midchei basra, nami lohani. Right, mustn't get luzev. Each one or two brothers to one girl, each one gave a get. The second one is meaningless, doesn't do anything. Okay, so he said like this. Even though Gamliel says over there, even though he says ain't get acher get, the Gemara over there says that sheesh get acher maimer. If you give maimer to one and you give a get to the other one, the get is effective in the sense that he can't marry them anymore. So give a chalitza. Umaimer acher get. He also says that if you give a get to one and then you follow it up with maimer to the second one, you still have to give a get. You always need a get after the maimer. If you give maimer, either you can't consummate the marriage now because you gave a get to one. But if you give maimer, after maimer, you have to give a get and chalitza. Who do you give chalitza to? So he's madashi yesh get acher maimer, but maimer acher get. So the get adif lalani mimer. If a get is stronger, mimer shouldn't help after a get a basrei, right? If get is stronger, then mimer should be ineffective. Like get acher get doesn't do anything. Mimer acher get shouldn't do anything, but it does. The mimer adif mimer is stronger. Lalani get a basrei get shouldn't help. Get on the other one shouldn't help afterwards. You see that they're both weak, and therefore a chalitza on one is good for the other one too. That's what Rashi explains it to me that they're both about the same. They're both they're the same, and it's a weaker chalitza in both cases. But each one, it's not like we learn on Amud Aleph that a weak chalitza on a sister is not going to help on the Atzara, a stronger one. Here they're both weak, and therefore chalitza neither one is okay. What is this doing over here? A little bit hard to understand. Why is it dafka over here? Maybe because we're talking about weak and strong. Amar Rav Huna, listen to this. Now we come back to our issue of two sisters, right? Reuben and Shimon, Levi and Yehuda. Reuben and Shimon died, left Leah and Rachel. What does the Mishnah say? Levi says, "What do you do?" The Mishnah says that. Our Mishnah said they sold. So what do? You got to have chalitza to both. Chalitza to both, right? Chalitza to both. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. Beis Achayos, listen to what he says. Now we're not dealing even with the tsaros over here. Just talking about the sisters. You have Reuben and Shimon married to Leah and Rachel. Reuben and Shimon died and left the two sisters to Levi and Yehuda. Could be one brother, but we'll talk about two brothers, right? Levi and Yehuda there. Says, listen to this. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. Beis Achayos, these two sisters. Yibam Shenaf Liyav Mechet fell to one. Let's say Levi, right? Chalitza Rishona. Listen carefully. Let's assume Reuben died first. When Reuben died first, can Levi perform Yibam if he wanted to? Why not? He's not married to anybody. It's Levi. He's not married, right? Okay. So he could marry Levi. Left the Yamechab. He gave Chalitza, and he gave Chalitza. You don't want to marry, gave her Chalitza, right? Putra, she can get married. Chalitza Shni, now he gave, Shimon died, and he gave Chalitza to her too, right? Gave Chalitza to her too. Putra, she can get married, nice and simple. Let's say, though, he didn't do Chalitza yet. Mesa Rishona, the first one, died. Mesa Rishona, Leah died. Leah died. Rishona, Mesa Rishona. Mutter B'shniya. He says, you know what? The first one died. He can marry the second one. Marry the second one. Why? Not sister anymore, right? Okay. Mutter B'shniya. That's what he says. Not sister anymore. Ein Sarach Loman, certainly Mesa Shniya Shemutter Rishona. Listen to this. When the first one, when Leah was Zalmana, right? When Reuben died first, there was only one sister there, no problem there at all, right? Okay. Then Shimon's wife, Shimon died, and he left Rachel, right? And he had two of them. So originally he could have married Leah with no problem. Could he have married Rachel with no problem? No, because when Rachel became available, she was already, Leah was still there, right? So he says, Ein Sarach Lomer, certainly, in other words, but he says, if Leah died, you could marry Rachel. And certainly, if Rachel died, he could marry Leah because Leah was available originally, free and clear, right? If Rachel died, why? Because Leah is Yavama Shehutra. She was originally okay. Vanesra, she became usher. What happened? Remember, Leah he could have married right away, but he didn't. And then Shimon died, and he had Rachel. So now each one is a chod skukasa, right? He can't marry either one. But now that Rachel died, he can go back to his original heter. Like he had to originally go back to Ibn Rishona. In other words, Rav says that if either one of them died, even if Leah died, you can marry Rachel, even though Rachel, when she first fell, was usher, because when she first fell, Leah was there. But if Leah died, he can marry her. And certainly, if Rachel died now, he can marry Leah because Leah was originally okay. He had a heter. You have a heter, got an ishur here. I got my original ishur. You got his ishur. Then it became us. But that's what Rav says. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Only the second case I said works. Rabbi Yochanan Mesa Shniya. If Rachel died, then Mutter Brishona, because originally Leah was okay. So if Rachel died, it goes back to Avo Mesa Rishona. But if Leah dies, no, Asher B'Shni can't marry Rachel because Rachel, when she originally became available, was not available. When Shimon died, was not available. My time. When her husband died, when she fell to you, when she wasn't mutter right at that point, in other words, if you weren't available right away, and in this case, Rachel was not available right away because when she became available, so to speak, when her husband died, Leah was there. It's like and it's asura. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. So we machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Rav.
That prohibits someone to take a sister after their sister died.
Yeah, okay. So that's not the case there, because over here, because we're not talking about a yibam in a regular case. In a regular case, if the sister dies, man's married to a woman and she dies, he can marry her sister, because it's not a case of yibam, not a case of yibam. Here we're talking about a special case of yibam. Here we're talking about making a yibam case. The yibam case really has to get it out of the problem of you can't marry your brother's wife normally, except if there was no children, etc., etc. Okay, fine. But if at the time that your brother died, she was not available to you, then she's always usher. Then she's always usher. And this is a good point, because this is what you're saying. Let's say you had a simple case of two brothers married to two sisters, right? Two brothers married. Reuven dies. Can Shimon marry your sister? No, he can't. It's a chosishto. Let's say afterwards his wife dies. His wife dies subsequently, right? Let's say Shimon's wife dies, right? Reuven and Shimon are married, Leah and Rachel. We don't have to repeat those. So we know the characters, right? Reuven dies. Can Shimon marry Leah? No, he's married to Rachel, right? Okay, now let's say Rachel dies. Can he marry Leah now? No, it's his brother's wife. Oh, but you're allowed to marry your wife's sister. Yes, not in a case of Yibam, but not if she was married to your brother's wife. Not if your wife's sister was married to your brother. So that's what you mean over there. You're talking about no Yibam. I'm talking about there's Yibam involved. Yeah. They're children for sure. There's nothing to talk about. And if there's children, it makes no difference. If there's not a case of Yibam, if she is not your brother's wife, then, and if you died and you had children, you could still marry. If she had children and you had children, it doesn't make any difference. If it's not a case of Yibam. Yibam, the problem with Yibam is that it's Eishasach. You can't marry. You can marry your wife's sister if your wife is not alive anymore. But you can't marry your brother's wife no matter what. Oh, except there's a certain case. If he died with no children and she wasn't an erva to you for some other reason, then you can marry her. In this case, okay, so we have this machlokas Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. What's the machlokas? If Leah dies, can you marry Rachel? Rav says you can, right? If Leah dies, right? They both fell to you. First Leah fell, Reuven died, then Shimon died, and then you have Rachel. So Rav says even if Leah dies, you can marry Rachel, even though she wasn't mutter when she fell to you. So the Gemara now says, what about that problem? But Rav Leslie Haisfar does not hold to that problem. Rav says later on, any woman who at the time when she fell to you, they can't marry. It's like your brother's wife who has children, and she's also period. Rav holds to that too. That's when there's an achos isha d'oraisa, meaning if she's your wife, she's really your wife's sister. Your brother died and left you his wife, and she is your wife's sister, then that's since she's not available to you, she's never available. So like I said, even if subsequently your own wife died, and now your wife's sister is the sister of your wife who's dead, then you could marry her normally, but not over here because it's a Yavama case. So where she's really married to you. But here you're not really married to either one. Levi's not married to Leah or to Rachel. He's not married to Leah or Rachel. They both felt it's a chotz kukato. That's only drabanan. Here you have the words aval hecha, aval hocha. Zika is only drabanan. It's not the oraisa. Shes mira oraisa. You have to marry her or give her a chalitza. But how strong is that zika? It's not really even if you say zika, there is yesh zika, and it's like she's married to. It's only like the rabbi said. It's like a zika drabanan, and therefore, if Leah dies, he could marry Rachel. The Zika falls away. The Zika is only Drabanan. So that's what Rav says. Now we have a problem with our Mishnah. I don't understand our Mishnah. Says Rabbi Yochanan. Forget about, okay, let's say we machmir like Rabbi Yochanan. You can't marry, if Rachel dies, he can't marry, if Leah dies, he can't marry Rachel. But everybody agrees that if Rachel dies, he can marry Leah because they were first. What about the Mishnah? Mishnah's Arba Achan. Our Mishnah we learned yesterday. Arba Achan, Beis Menasum, Beis Achayos. 4 brothers, Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. Reuben, Shimon married to Leah and Rachel. Umeisa, the son is Chayis. And Reuben and Shimon died. Harel Chosas, Lo Misams. They can't make Yibam. Now why? Vamai. Why do you say, if something happens to one, you can marry the other? Let Yehuda, let's say, get up. Let Yehuda get up, give chalitza to Rachel. Let her give chalitza to the Shnia. What happened over here? Reuben died, let's say, right? Left Leah. At that point, Levi or Yehuda could have married Leah, right? Then Shimon died, right? Shimon died and left Rachel. Okay, but according to Rabbi Yochanan and Rav, if something happened to the second one, you can marry the first one, right? So why doesn't Yehuda give chalitza to Rachel to get her out of the picture, as if Rachel's dead, right? Get her out of the picture. Let Yehuda give chalitza to. They came from two different husbands. Left chalitza to different brothers. Let Yehuda give chalitza to Rachel, and then Leah becomes available again to Levi, let's say, right? Why can't? Because originally she was available. According to you saying originally was available. So he says everybody. So what? That's the case. But why do you say halel chotzes lo misyavmos? That's the mishnahs. Oh, there a chotz goes. You give him go chalitza. Why? Why? But like a chabinai lechel tzachad l'shniya, but have a rishon like avirach kivam shlutim nesva chasbuta to tachsel et rishona. Originally, when Leah became available, she could have married Levi or Yehuda. So, what happened? Rachel got into the picture. Now it's a chotz gosa. Fine, let Yehuda get rid of her, give her chalitza, and let Levi, doesn't make any difference which brother, but just give an example, let Levi marry Leah now. What's the problem? Rabbi Yochanan says, you're right. I don't know who learned this Mishnah. I don't agree with the Mishnah. Doesn't make sense. Mishnah says you have to give them both chalitza? No. Yehuda could give chalitza to Rachel, and then Levi can have Leah available again to him. So the Gemara now says, "V'lei malei my choltzes." Why do you have to give that answer and say, "I don't know the Mishnah. The Mishnah doesn't make sense to me"? What's the lashon say? Klomer zuein a Mishnah. That's what Yochanan says. Rashi says that it's not a Mishnah. Doesn't make sense, right? Why don't you say? I'll give you an answer for the Mishnah. Lei malei my choltzes not miktani choltzes chada. Maybe it just means you give chalitza to one, give chalitza to Rachel and Mary, and the other brother will marry Leah. Maybe that's what it means. This is choltzos tani plural. They both get chalitza. So my choltzes to Alma. In general, the second one, Leah gets Rachel gets chalitza, the one who fell second. So as Harei Eluk Tani, it says both of them. You can't say chalotza. It says both these women, right? Both Leah and Rachel have to get chalitza. The choltza rishona bereisha. Maybe it means this. You know why the chalitza? Because if you give chalitza first to Leah, what happens then? Then you can't marry Rachel because Rachel never had a hetzer, right? Like Rabbi Yochanan, asking Rabbi Yochanan, right? This choltzos tani lachachilus mashma. You give chalitza to both of them originally. You have to give both chalitza. It didn't say choltzos. They both have to give chalitza. Why don't you say in the Mishnah? Gzeira dilma kadam b'cholitz rishona bereisha. Why don't you say, you know what? Really, you could do that solution. You could have Yehuda give chalitza to Rachel and then have Leah marry Levi. But we're afraid that you might give chalitza to Leah first, and then it doesn't work. Not like Rav. So Dilma maybe it says really you give chalitza to both. Like say Dilma kara b'cholitz rishon bereisha. Right? It says below misyabos tani that you can't. Smashma that yibam doesn't work here at all. There's no yibam here at all. So he couldn't give this. Why does he say this? Oh, remember we said before? He says, why don't you say you don't do this because you're afraid if you give Yibam, if you allow Yibam even into the second one to Leah with Levi, you're afraid you'll do Yibam first, and then the other brother will die, and you won't give anything to the second one, right? And the other one will be also because achos chulutzasa or achos ishto. Maybe Leimelek Zeir Shem Yamas for also about the mitzvahs Yavaman. Maybe you're afraid of that if you allowed it all. So it explains Rashi. No, Rabbi Yochanan not worried about Misa. That's why Rabbi Yochanan didn't give that answer. Not worried. He's not worried about Misa. Tosfos talks about it elsewhere that sometimes you are worried about Misa, like by a Kohen Gadol. Remember by Yom Kippur, you give him another wife in case but that's in the So right, so right. So but the point over there is that there's a difference between worrying about Misa in the short term versus Misa in the long term. Over here in our Gemara, the Gemara that talked about you're worried about Misa because Chalitza don't have to do right away. They might wait a few months or a year or whatever. So in the long term, you're worried about Misa. In the short term, you're not. But why didn't you say Rav Lezer to Amar Kivin Shalom Dashla Shas Beiser Nesra Olav Olamas? Rav Lezer says later on, when anybody's usher to you at all, even for a period, even in between, not originally, it's usher forever. Even Sham the Shalas and Leah was usher for a period of time when Rachel became available too. Then it's usher forever. But that's Rav Lezer Shita. But Mid Sefer Rav Lezer Rachel Lezer. The Sefer says not like that. Havel Chotos. Rav Lezer said in our Mishnah. Rav Lezer says Beishamai says you could marry if they stayed married. If they both married them, you could marry. Beisil says you don't marry them. Beis Hillel says even if they got married, the two of them got, if Levi and Yehuda perform Yibam, you have to divorce them. But Rav Lazar says that's only Beis Shammai's opinion, Beis Hillel's opinion, not Beis Shammai. So since the seifers are Rav Lazar, it's mashma reish, it's not. I'll tell you how it happened. You know what? Maybe the Mishnah is speaking about where they both died at the same time. They both had a car accident, and therefore you don't know which one died. They died at the same time. So therefore you can't say one was available before the other one, and you can work the solution. So you can be exact and know exactly when they died. That's a far out thing. We don't, our Tana Mishnah, we're not saying because that's very hard to say they both died simultaneously. But okay, we don't know that they died simultaneously, but it could be where we don't know who died first. If you know that Reuben died first and Leah became available, so she was available for a while. So why can't she come re-available after Yehuda performs chalitza on Rachel? But over here we don't know who died first. But Beis Hillel said that if Yehuda and Levi married Rachel and Leah, what do we say? You got to get rid of them. Bishlam Rishona, the first one. I mean, how you like to mutter? Maybe you married the wrong one. Maybe you married Rachel. Maybe you married the one who was available, who only became a second, meaning that was never available at all. Ela Shnia, but the second one, Amai, Amar. Why can't he say the second one who got married? He could say, listen, the first guy who got married, he married Rachel. I married Leah, who was available, and I did a beheter. In other words, even if you say, I don't know who married first, so the first guy who got married, say, fine, you have to leave your marriage because maybe you married the wrong one. But the second guy could say, I'm mutter either way, because he performed Yibam, and he could say, listen, my friend, my brother, he married the wrong one, and I married the right one. So why do you force me out of the marriage? This is why he makes it. That's exactly because he could have given this answer. He says, I don't understand who learned this Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan says, I don't agree with the Mishnah. The Mishnah says they both have to get chalitza. They don't have to both get chalitza. Even if you say you don't know which one's available first, why do you say that if they married them, you have to get rid of both of them? Why do you have to say it? You don't really have to say that. You only the first one you could say that to, but not to the second one. Therefore, the Mishnah doesn't make sense according to Rabbi Yochanan. Pick up here tomorrow, Mr. Have a good day. Shavua Tov.